Welcome to WWDMD, a podcast that pulls back the curtain on what clinicians really think and feel as they work with others. I'm Dr. Meyers, a psychotherapist in New York City, and each week I sit down with clinicians to explore the emotional realities, challenges, and personal experiences that shape the work we do. My hope is that with every episode, you'll learn something not only about this profession, but about yourself. Please note that any case details discussed have been modified to protect client privacy.
What would Dr. Myers do?
Something most of us don't talk about, but almost all of us carry. You may experience shame in different contexts, or maybe all the time, perhaps with great or occasional intensity and consistency. Shame can feel pretty heavy, even soul crushing. It's that quiet voice that shows up and says, something's wrong with me, or if people really knew me, they wouldn't accept me. You're not worthy of love and belonging. And that feeling can make us hide parts of ourselves or all of ourselves. So today we're going to unpack shame to specifically address what it is, how it operates, and why it can be so hard to shake. We're also going to distinguish shame from guilt. And I hope learn how to shift the belief from I am bad to I did something bad, if that, by challenging the toxicity of shame. So I'm with Connie Palmer, LCSW, who returns to the podcast for what I know will be a thoughtful and deeply resonant conversation. Welcome back, Connie.
Oh, it's great to be here. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. So let's dive in. Um, you want to define shame?
Yeah, I think you did a really good job already. I like, okay, everybody, what Amy just said. The word shame, my mom was always one for telling me to go look words up in the dictionary. So shame literally means to cover. So when we think of that experience of shame, we literally want to hide and cover ourselves. We wish there would be an opening in the floor that we could just drop through when we experience that feeling. So, as you shared, it's when some part of you or all of you is exposed and open, a part of you that maybe you never want to be seen, like you make a public mistake or something like that. And then everyone can see this part of you that you feel will get you kicked out. Like people won't like you anymore. They're going to kick you off the island, like on Survivor.
Mm.
And this is something that, may not be bad at all. It may just be something that all of us live with and do. So that's the sort of overarching definition. And I like to think of it as a noun. So it's like a verb, excuse me, it's like an experience that we have, that we carry within us, that we have a physical reaction to. It changes our thoughts. It causes us to have very intense and just regulating emotions. But it's also a verb. So people will often shame or attack themselves, say vicious things to themselves that they would never say to anyone else. Or there are people who will shame others. Shame is a social construct. And I got to say, right now in the United States, shame is running
Rampant.
wild.
Yeah.
It is just, there's shaming that is just on social media, in our political dialogue, it's everywhere. And so shame, if we think of it as that social construct, is used to control. So if you think about all of the systems that use shame to some degree as a means of control, we can think about politics. We see it on social media. We see it in systems like the medical, you know, the medical profession in our country. And we see it in schools, we see it in the welfare system, we see it in the military. So it shows up in not just our individual lives, but our collective lives together.
And because of that, would you say that shame is learned? Like, why do we develop
Yeah.
shame and why is it so paramount amongst most of us?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it is sort of as I said, a social construct or something that we learn in life, both from this part of me is not okay. We learn that often in childhood, both from our peers or from the families we grew up in who may shame us for parts of ourselves that that there's nothing wrong with, but that we may develop, even if it's not overtly said to us, we may develop a sense of that part of me is better left hidden. I better not let people know that part of me. And it's also a sort of a necessary construct of how we as a society develop, here are the things that are not okay. And that we would say, abusing a child, that is not okay. Killing someone, lying. We have, so this is our sense of sort of the common good. We will, a social contract. We will all follow these rules. And when someone does not follow those rules, they're shamed. They're supposed to feel bad because they've violated an agreement that we all sort of agree and live with, or at least that's what we hope we do. So
So shame
shame
is a
is,
part of a moral compass?
yeah. So it's, I'm kind of getting into how I sort of see shame, that we have toxic shame, which is very destructive, that soul-eating emotion that Carl Jung talks about. It's very painful and very, very destructive. But there is healthy shame, which most of your listeners are going to go, what? Wait, Brene says no. John Bradshaw back in the day says that, and what they're describing is toxic shame. But a lot of the shame theorists talk about how, shame is just part of how we have a sense of what's okay in our society and what is not okay. Marsha Linehan, the founder of DBT, talks about that there is, shame that is justified. And what that means is that there's, when we violate those, that sort of rules about the common good, about how we'll all behave, that we're supposed to feel bad about that, because not only is it not just, it's not just because it's wrong, it's because of how it impacts the collective. It has a big impact not only just on you but on everyone. So, but there are many things where people in our society, let's say the LGBTQ community, where for generations and generations that community was shamed by many cultures, not just the American culture, and that's not justified shame. Even though the society is like, that's bad, we're going to vote you off the island because that's a terrible thing. It does no harm. So it really isn't. We have, some things that are not justified, or let's say I feel like I'm ugly or stupid. That's not justified. So we think of shame that is toxic. That's when it's not justified, when we are really doing harm to ourselves and others, perhaps for no good reason.
Right. So let's stay on. I don't know if this should come afterwards because I know we want to talk about shame as a toxic force, but I am very curious about how it serves us. So we have the moral construct piece, right? There's certain things that like guide our
Right.
behavior. And I think I've, read about how shame can be a motivator and as a
Mm-hmm.
protective manager, right? So
Mm-hmm.
should we talk about this now? Do you think, or yeah,
Sure.
let's
No,
talk about
let's
how it
go. Yeah.
can serve us,
Yeah.
how it can be positive
Right.
in a certain
So,
degree, which I hear what you're
y-
saying, right? I mean,
yes. Yes. So, you know, what I would see, shaming myself into changing is not a motivator because it doesn't really last. Oh, you're a fat pig, you should lose weight. Yeah, it might build some traction, but it's not really going to last because it's not based in a sense of my own goodness. And, it's not a loving, it's a hating voice. So
right.
though that kind of social, or individual change. But, if I don't want to be that. I don't want to be that person. That person lied and cheated and was not good to his or her children. I want to be this, which is that sort of what we might call more guilt, where this was not an okay thing of how I lived and how I treated other people. I want to be different. And that actually that healthy shame can be motivating to make amends and apologize, repent, and change how we've been. It can also make us more free to pursue the things that we really love to do, and or have a goal to do. So when we get move from that very toxic shame to let, or, is one way we get free, but also when we use that healthy shame as a motivator to say, I want to be different.
Well, yeah, okay, that makes sense. And I'm thinking now
Yeah.
about healthy shame versus guilt, because to me, shame is experienced personally and feels much heavier than guilt,
Yes. Yeah.
right? So when the example
Yes.
that you gave when you've maybe like wronged a friend or you need to apologize because you feel so bad, you're identifying that as shame. I would call
Yeah.
that guilt.
Yeah.
What's the difference? Maybe we can
Yeah, this
distinguish
is
that.
this is a this is a challenging because the words get, often people will come into your office and say, I'm feeling so guilty. And what they're really describing is shame.
Uh-huh.
So shame is I am bad, or this part of me is bad. Guilt is this behavior is not okay.
Mm-hmm.
And John Bradshaw, Brene Brown, they talk about that distinction very clearly, that guilt is actually a pro-social thing. When you are in toxic shame, where you're, self-loathing and contempt for yourself, or you're doing that to other people, that's destructive. That isn't going to be helping anyone. But that guilt, which is how can I change? Let's say I did something that was harmful to you. How can I change our relationship? What can I do differently? I remember once hearing this story, this man who'd cheated on his wife, and she had just such trouble trusting him, and he went out and planted tulips, which are her favorite flower, in the fall, and then they came up in the spring. Just as an act of I'm not that person anymore, and I want to be with you. So what little acts of goodness do we do that we want in that healthy guilt motivates us to do?
I'd love to hear from you. Send in your therapy-related questions for an upcoming live Q&A where we'll talk openly about the process, challenges, and realities of therapy.
Let me tell you, I have this great story that so my supervisor, when I was just about to become a social worker, this is back in 92, gave me this article by Robert Karen called Shame. And it changed everything about how I thought about myself, my clients, and most therapists are not well trained or well versed in shame clinically at all. It's not. My daughter just got her master's in social work. It was not even mentioned in any of her curriculum. So my supervisor back in 92 gave me this article, and shortly thereafter, I was working with a client who I'd been seeing for several years. And he came into the session full of self-loathing because of something terrible he had said to his daughter. So I would say 40 minutes of a 50-minute session was spent just listening to him be so hard on himself and verbally abusive and saying terrible things to himself. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay, he's in terrible pain. I'm an empathic person, but I wasn't feeling any empathy. I'm
Mm,
like, why not?
mm.
Why are you not feeling any empathy? So I'm listening and listening. And suddenly it hits me, who's he not talking about? So shame is very self-referential, both toxic shame and healthy shame. We are only focused on, okay, me here. But healthy shame can move us to, oh, how is this affecting others?
So he
So
should have been talking about his daughter?
yes,
Okay.
right. So I finally, it hit me because I read that. I was like, wow, he's full of shame,
Mm-hmm.
but where is the guilt? Where is the, what are you going to do now?
Mm.
So I said to him, wow, I hear you're in. And as soon as I had that thought, I was like, now I felt such empathy for him. I was like, you're really in so much pain. You're being so hard on yourself. But I wonder how your daughter's doing. And I wonder what you're going to be doing to help make this right with her. And then he was into guilt and he was into repenting and seeing that guilt was motivating him to be different, That's, and maybe that it started with that, maybe a sense of healthy shame, but then it moved into appropriate amends and changing of behavior and apologizing to his daughter. So that story really helps me sort of hear the difference, and also how we individually and how clinicians can help clients who come in with this big load of shame. This guy had actually done something terrible. I don't remember what it was anymore, but it was a cruel thing that he had
Hmm.
said. And he rightly felt bad. And that he was beating up on himself, but moving that to, how does this really impact not just you, but your relationship with your daughter? And then he was able to move forward.
So the shift or the goal to move shame to guilt is twofold. One, to relieve the person of the intensity of the emotion, but
Yes.
two, to, as you're saying, make amends to
Yes.
relieve the emotion, but
Yeah.
also to deepen the
Yes.
interpersonal relationship.
Yes. And it's also, I call it sort of welcoming the person back onto the human bus.
Mm,
We kick ourselves off the island, we kick others off, but it's like we're all going to mess up.
mm.
We're all going to make mistakes and say things that hurt others. It's just not, it's just being willing to own that and admit it. What we often do is blame others for it or beat up on ourselves. And neither one of those, both of those are going to be really destructive to individually and to our relationships.
Is that the projection of shame? So when you were talking about this idea that, we also shame other people, right? There are those
Yes.
of us who shame ourselves and shame other people,
Yes.
but there are also those
Yes.
of us who do both.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
generally speaking, when we're shaming other people, that, yes, you would see that as a projection.
Yeah. So, how I would explain it in when I do this workshop, I have like a spectrum of shame. So if you picture, like on one side to the other, and if you think about the left-hand side of this shame continuum as that toxic shame that most of us think about, where we're self-denigrating, where we're internalizing that shame. We feel humiliation, we feel contempt for ourselves, we feel less than. And we might say things like, I'm not worthy, I don't deserve, I'm bad. So that's toxic. But on the other end of the continuum, what you're sort of getting to is what I would call externalizing our shame. And we do both. We internalize it and externalize it. Some people are more one than the other, but
Hmm.
all human beings might be a mixture of both. So when we externalize that shame, I'm superior to others. I'm looking down at others. I'm judging them. I feel a contempt for them. I feel superior to them. So I'm better than this is sort of our grandiosity and our entitlement. And I never do anything wrong. It's those people.
Hmm.
So both of those are toxic, both to us as individuals, but and you can see the mess that both make of relationships.
Yes.
And then, in the center of that continuum is that healthy shame that you and I have been talking about.
Right. So I'm just thinking about, and maybe this is reiterating what you already said, the idea of externalizing shame is so that the person doesn't have to experience the feeling themselves.
Exactly.
And in that
Exactly.
way, that serves them. So when you're working as a therapist with somebody like that, you have to do what?
Yeah, so that person is, in some ways, we used to back in the day, we used to call the person on the left-hand side the person who's internalized. We used to call that neurosis, right? They're beating up on themselves. That person is much more able to admit a wrong.
Hmm.
They often have much more insight. They helping them is often a little bit easier because they're in pain, they're aware of their pain, and they want to be in less pain. The person who externalizes that shame, who is cruel, who often appears to be a sociopath, that they're doing and saying terrible things to others, and they have no empathy in that moment. It's totally self-protective. So, that person somewhere in their lives had to develop a way of protecting themselves from this incredibly painful emotion of shame. And, so it's very, the work with them is much slower, much more difficult. They often don't have that awareness of I've done anything wrong. They may believe their own story of I am better, but underneath that, there is this deep sense of there's something about me that it's like they have to keep proving themselves all the time. I'm better than others, rather than they often have anxiety and that just that driving force of always having to keep going to prove their worthiness and their superiority, which is exhausting.
Exhausting. I was just thinking, it was exhausting. Yeah. Yeah. And what is your emphasis, if at all, on understanding where the shame comes from for the individual and with
Yeah,
them, really
yeah,
understanding it so that,
yeah,
one can kind
yeah,
of repair that through the relationship that you have with the client and through your
yeah,
lens of how you perceive them, right? Because the shame is connected to feelings of loathing that have probably
right.
been, right, internalized from, I
Yeah,
usually assume, right, the family system is a lot of that, even though you are talking to a very different
right,
socio-political climate now.
right.
What's your stance on that or perspective
Yeah,
on
I think that you know, being able to get a good history of what that person has been through. And often they may not really say, oh, my mom shamed me, but we begin to pick up some of the pieces of, oh, this may be where that person who externalizes their shame got this belly full of shame and needed to protect themselves. And so they had this sense of always needing to be superior, always needing to be one up. But it can also manifest into that self-denigration and internalizing. So, why someone becomes one or the other, maybe just a character or a personality issue, but it's really getting to what the wound is.
hmm
So one of the exercises I do in this workshop, and I've done it in person and in webinars, is I have people take a mask and they do it anonymously. And so on the front of the mask, they put what they show the world. So, I'm kind, I'm thoughtful, I'm brilliant, whatever they perceive as what will make people like them and what is their best self that they project out into the world. So, but then you have them flip the mask over and write, what are the things you don't show? What are the things that would make people reject you and not want to be around you? What do you have to hide or cover up? Which again is exhausting. But that simple exercise,
Yeah.
because I just did a workshop yesterday for social workers, and they had, imposter syndrome, depression, grief, um, mistakes, regrets, so many things on the back of their mask. And then I ask, it's anonymous, so no one knows who's saying what. And then I ask, what was it like to do this? And they say two things: really vulnerable, even though it was anonymous, and relief.
Mm.
There's this relief in, oh, I'm on the human bus here. This is all of us.
hmm
All of us have, and the things on the back of the mask are the things that we hide,
hmm
that we assume will cause us to be rejected. But
hmm
once they tell everyone in this little exercise, they're like, oh wait, it's not just me. Other people walk around with this experience of that part of me will get me rejected. If I say I have depression or anxiety, people will think less of me. Yeah.
Yeah. That sounds like a very powerful exercise
Yeah.
that I would like to lead and I would like to participate in at the same time.
Yeah.
But I'm
Yeah.
thinking about what you said. There's a connection between shame and vulnerability, right? You
Yeah.
feel
Oh,
very
huge.
vulnerable carrying
Yeah.
around with this. You
Yeah.
see, you perceive that everybody else sees what you're trying
Yes.
to hide, or
Yes.
that you would really like to hide and can't
Yes.
contain potentially.
Yes.
So can you just
Yes.
say a little bit more about the connection between shame
Yeah.
and vulnerability?
So I came across a quote, and now I'm not going to be able to remember the person's name, but I'll email you and you
That's
can put it in the show
okay.
notes.
Yeah.
But avoiding suffering, Andy Crouch, it just came to me. Avoiding suffering, avoiding our vulnerability causes suffering to me and to others. So if we avoid that part of us, that's the vulnerable stuff is on the back of the mask. It's not necessarily things that are bad about us. It's things that we're worried if people saw them, they would reject us. They would think less of us. They wouldn't want to be our friend. So when we, see vulnerability as half of our humanity. So American culture, we're big on keep strong, carry on, growth mindset, think positive, which is not bad. But our humanity is both strong and vulnerable. Vulnerable literally means we can be injured. And so that mask it's so understandably protective in an environment where people will shame you. When I run a group, and I'm sure this is true for you, one of the first rules people put is no judgment.
Yeah.
And I always laugh because I'm like,
Yeah.
you already have.
Right.
We judge ourselves, we judge others. It's just not imposing those judgments that is what creates that safety. And being able to say, to talk about the things, increasingly with friends, with a therapist, the things were like maybe tentatively, I could show this part of me. And then wait, it gets received with empathy and, even appreciated, that's when we begin to shift towards not so much having to hide the things that we see as vulnerable, but just seeing them as a part of our humanity.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm thinking about, what kind is happening is reality testing, right? You're
Yes.
putting
Yeah,
out there
exactly.
and other people are responding in a way that you couldn't even imagine. And I
Exactly.
think about how corrective or healing that is.
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
if I compare that group experience to me working with somebody individually who's struggling with these same feelings, and I normalize the feelings, like they're not
Yeah.
the only one who has these feelings,
Yes.
right? Many
Yes.
people experience this. I mean, I think that's helpful, but I think that, when you have that group experience, that real life lived experience where,
Yeah.
in the here and now, people are expressing and countering how you
Yeah.
perceive things, that's so helpful, right? That's
Yeah.
so powerful.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you're enjoying the honest conversations on this show, check out my new blog, Between Practice and Purpose, at BPP3, the number 3, voices.com. It's a shared space I created with two former students where we explore the mess, meaning, and vulnerability of life in this helping profession. If this podcast resonates with you, I think the blog will too. Um,
Yeah.
so I'm thinking,
I
yeah,
just
of
want to go
course.
back to,
Mhm.
because you asked me about it being protective, and that's a really key thing. So then we can go where you were going to go. Um, so all of us, or not all, most of us grew up with an emotion that was not okay. So in my family, anger, the parents were able to be angry, but the kids were not. You would get punished if you were angry.
Mhm.
And so my brothers were really good at being angry, and it didn't go well for them. And I was like, heck no. Some part of me had some wisdom, like, don't do that. So when I would get angry as a kid, instead of anger, I would feel shame immediately. So someone would wrong me, someone in the family would do something wrong to me. Anger would come, it would be there, but it wouldn't even get to my conscious level because shame would go in and go, oh no, that would be a terrible, you're going to get hurt. This is not going to go well for you. So that's protective. When we say shame is bad, it's really not helpful. Shame is an is. So that shame kept me very safe. So it's like, I always think of it like, you know, we often image young therapists, who are not maybe wise yet, their whole goal is to help me get angry, or to see anger as good. But what's often missing is seeing that shame and how brilliant it was. And, in IFS, internal family systems, we would even thank that part of us. Thank you for keeping me safe. Because if we just make that bad, that shame, oh, it's terrible that you felt that shame about anger. No, it was actually really helpful. And when we can sort of thank that part of us and appreciate, then it can, we can begin to let go of that control a little bit and recognize that maybe anger is okay. It's sort of a baby steps type of thing, but it all starts off with that understanding that when shame comes up, to be curious about it. instead of trying to get rid of it. And most people, because it's so painful, they're like, I got to get rid of this. In fact, they
Right.
come to therapy and they're like, Amy, get rid of this for me.
Right. Right.
And you're like, yeah, no, we're just going to be curious about it together.
But can you concretize a little bit more about how shame is helpful in that
Okay.
scenario?
Right. So so in my, and I think maybe if this isn't what you're looking for, just guide me, but
Okay.
I would get angry, I think as a human being would, but I would never express it as a kid because what I felt was I'm bad if I do that.
Right.
And when I first went into therapy, I remember very proudly telling my therapist I'd only been angry twice in my life. And she said, well, we're going to fix that. And I was like
Uh-huh.
terrified.
Uh-huh.
Um, but over time, we began to is anger bad? Why was it bad? What happened when, people in your family were angry? It was terrifying. So, I didn't want people to be angry with me, and me being angry would have gotten them very angry at me, and that would have been very unsafe. So the shame was really that feeling that would come up in me, like you're bad if you express this anger,
Right.
kept me, safe in
Right.
terms of, what would the outcome would be if I had shown that anger to my parents.
Right. Okay. That's very, very helpful.
Good. Okay.
Um, yeah. Yeah. So it's so complicated, right? And so you're right in that, like, you're not going to go into therapy and say, well, we're going to make you able to express your anger, because anger is healthy. It's a healthy
Yeah.
emotion, and it's also okay. But at the same time, it makes me think about defenses, right? We don't want to strip
Right.
our clients of their defenses until we
Exactly.
develop their ego to be able to manage that.
Exactly. Yeah,
So we have
exactly.
to make anger less scary, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
hopefully that's something that develops in the transference too, right? That's
Right.
something that when a client is angry or upset with their therapist, because that's such a safe environment that hopefully they,
Yes.
can brave, a first experience of expressing that and have it be not only just tolerated but embraced and
Yeah.
validated, right? That they have a
Yes.
right to
I'm
express that
so glad you
feeling.
told me. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
It's almost like a mirror, that, what was mirrored to us as children. It's like a funhouse mirror. It's not accurate, and you come into therapy and people are like, yeah, I'm so glad you told me, because now we can talk about it. And
right.
it's like, really? And that really is that's why therapy is such a gift to people when they can just, get a corrective emotional experience of that, right?
Exactly. And that's why it's been said that therapy is oftentimes, considered reparenting.
Yes, it is.
So let's talk just a little bit more about the toxicity and the way it shows up, because I feel like we've covered how, it certainly blocks self-awareness, and
Yes,
it hinders you from being able to think rationally. It blocks
yes,
empathy. It's
yes,
projected onto others. It's emotionally painful.
yeah.
But then there's
The trauma
aspects of
response, yeah.
the trauma response. But then
Mhm.
there's aspects of like limiting emotional expression, having black and white thinking. Um,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah,
So maybe is there any more to be
yeah.
said around those?
So I think of I do a lot of workshops on regulation in the schools, helping students know how to regulate. I'm like, well, the adults need to learn how to. We all are lifelong learners in how to regulate when we get triggered. Shame is one of those things that when it hits us, it is probably the most dysregulating affect there is. And we will attack self, we will attack others, we will say and do terrible things because when that amygdala, that survival part is at work, it's going to protect us. It's going to go fight, flight, freeze, fix, fawn, feign. All of our defensive systems are going to come out. And the prefrontal cortex is just it's not accessible. It's not even there. So it's that, being able to help that client or help yourself regulate, get back into your body. We can use tapping, we can use breathing, we can talk to ourselves, we can get a glass, just really actually getting, because we're not even in our bodies anymore because we're so much in survival mode. But getting back into our bodies And then, it's almost this weird thing of going, hello, shame. You just came and visited, you booger, you're back again, Uh, and because what I found is the more, and I tried to get rid of my shame, but either by being good
Right.
or that poem, I think of that, you do not have to be good, Mary Oliver's poem. So we try so hard to outrun our shame, and when we can just turn around and go, yeah, hello, you're here, and why are you here, what got triggered in me, and it's really that curiosity about it that we want to help ourselves get to, because it really, when we're in that state of hyper alert, we're not living, we're just surviving.
Yeah.
And shame is going to keep us in that survival mode, some people their whole lives. And
Hmm.
what you said earlier is, how many of us know somebody who's 40, but they revert to being a 4-year-old?
Hmm.
And that's when shame is triggered in us. We become very black and white. We see ourselves and others are all good or all bad. We're
Hmm.
not able to think critically.
Hmm.
And we can only think critically when we have that sense of safety in a therapist's office or find that safety within ourselves to be curious about this thing that we call shame.
Hmm. So I think in part of that you were talking about intervention and as you did in your workshop, but tell me about the ABCs of challenging toxic
Yeah.
shame.
So, I borrowed this from Bruce Feiler's book, Life is in the Transitions. If you're ever in a transition, this book is brilliant. It came out, ironically, best timing ever, right at the beginning of the pandemic when we were all going through what he would call a life quake. Um, but when we go through transitions, when we go through distress, when we go through suffering, when we are experiencing shame, I use this paradigm of his ABCs, which are agency, belonging, and calling. So the agency is that sense that I have power, and how do I use it in a healthy way? Sort of, I when I say it to school kids, I call it the Superman question. With great power comes great responsibility. I have power. How will I use it? People who have high levels of shame often have a very low sense of their own agency. They feel like they have to compete all the time to stay one up,
Mm.
or
Or
are
be
worried about.
liked?
I'm sorry.
Well, sorry to interrupt, but or be liked? Is it really
Yes,
just stay
exactly.
one up or and
Yeah,
also
it's
just
both.
be
It's both.
accepted?
Yes,
Okay. Be
yes,
loved?
exactly.
Mhm.
Yes. So, but people on that right-hand side of the continuum, they want to be up here because that's the only place that's safe.
Mhm.
So it could be being liked, it could just be, being looked up to, being admired, etc. So, when we have that experience, we often don't feel a sense of our own agency. So it's claiming that we have agency and then begin to think about how we use our power. Shame will cause us to either feel like we have none, many people who've been abused, they feel and have had the experience truly of being a victim. And so it's reclaiming that sense of agency, that I actually have power. Because I got to tell you, one of the things that triggers most people's shame is a feeling of powerlessness.
Mm.
So it's reclaiming I
Mm.
have power in my life. Even I say to students, even on your most powerless day, I ask them, how many of you have had a day where you felt powerless? And every hand, these little third and fourth graders, they all raise their hands. And I'm like, but even on that day, you still have power. So it's regaining that and considering how do we use our power. Most people who have survived hard things use their power reactively. It's self-defensive, and I got to get safe. What if we were able to move out of those defensive reactions to being able to be assertive, what I call kind and strong power, where it's not about being one up or one down. It's just, how do I encounter other human beings, be able to protect myself by being assertive, by setting boundaries, etc. So that's often that first step. I remember saying no. because, that was just not even a possibility in so just, being able to say no to
Yeah,
someone
yeah.
and realize you can survive it. And and that people will, oh, I'm glad you told me. I didn't know that you didn't want to do
But
that.
how do you take that first risk? I mean, does that come
Yeah.
through the therapeutic
Yeah.
relationship? Where,
Yeah.
where do you
Yeah.
get that bravado
Yeah.
to
So
do
in
that?
order to move out of our comfort zone into that new, doing anything new, we're going to be anxious. We're going to be really fearful. My therapist, who was so wise, would say, if you can't do it this time, there'll be another opportunity. Don't worry. And there always was, so it was building up that, like, the sort of, how we create change. We pre-contemplate, we contemplate, and then we move to action. So there's this process of sort of gaining a sense of, I want to do this, I need to do this, and then I did it, and you go back to your therapist's office and you do a little happy dance together. Yay, I finally set a boundary and I survived it. So the process of that, being able to claim your power and use your power, for some people can take a while, because often, I think especially people who identify as girls or females, often it's, claiming your power is seen as like you're being bitchy, you're being rude, you're aggressive, rather than, this is just part of what we do as humans. We set boundaries, we set limits, and that's a healthy thing to do.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of, I think about teenage girls who sit around, well, what do you want to do? I don't know. What do you want to do? It's like,
I say it
come
all the
on,
time.
pizza,
Absolutely. Right, right.
so
Don't be mad
we
at
often,
me, right? Because that's a
exactly,
subliminal message. Don't be mad at me.
exactly, we squish our power because we don't want
Hmm.
anybody to be upset with us.
Hmm.
So it's beginning to choose how to use our power instead of doing it reactively. So
Hmm.
that's agency. That's the A. B is welcoming people back onto the island. I do a workshop on attachment, and you think about Maslow's hierarchy, which we all learned in Intro to Psych class. And at the bottom is what they called your survival needs, food, water, shelter, clothing. But a lot of research has shown that actually what the bottom base is being able to have relationships, sustaining, supportive relationships. So that is actually primary for us as human beings. And shame blocks that.
Hmm.
So when we can find a safe person, a friend, a coach, a therapist, a partner who is like, yeah, that part doesn't scare me. It's not making me run away.
Hmm.
And we begin to have a different experience. We gain that sense of belonging. We live in a society where people die of loneliness,
Hmm.
at the same rate as if they smoked a pack of cigarettes a day.
Hmm.
Vivek Murthy, our previous Surgeon General, did that study. So, we need that sense of belonging. And what blocks us from even risking belonging is that sense of, people will judge me. People won't love me. I'll feel like I did. I'm never going to be vulnerable again because I got hurt, in these instances. So it's gaining that sense of, how I always think of belonging like Norm on Cheers. He'd walk in and everyone would go, Norm.
Norm.
It was just like this welcome. I'm
Yeah.
glad to see you. You're here. And again, that's that mirroring back of
Right.
a very different experience than we've had.
Mm, mm.
Um, but it requires risk. There's no way to move out of shame, and
Mhm.
that's why you need that. I needed years of therapy to unlearn that shame, and now I can't stop talking about it, Amy.
Ah, that's great. But that's why imposter syndrome is so important. Like it's
Yeah,
a good thing, I think. I mean,
yeah,
it feels awful, but it means that you're taking a risk. It means
yes,
that you've
yeah,
immersed yourself in something that's really uncomfortable and feels a little
yeah,
foreign to you, and you risking, as you're saying, feeling
yeah,
inept.
yeah,
But clearly you got there, right? Like you
yeah.
were hired or you're doing certain work that, somebody else saw in you
Mhm.
as potential.
Yeah, yeah,
But and it took me a long time to believe that the more you do something, the easier it does get. Wow, that's actually
yeah,
true, right?
exactly.
And
Yeah, and
and
we
some things
we
just
build on
take
that.
experience, right? They
Exactly.
take
Yeah.
experience.
And there's no shortcut to getting it. When I was a brand new therapist, I bought this book called The Imperfect Therapist. It's by this guy named Kotler, I think is his last name. It's out of print now, but it was so helpful
Mhm.
because, and they almost didn't finish the book because they felt so much shame about talking about all their therapeutic mistakes. But what a gift that was to me. Like, I'm gonna
Right,
make mistakes. And in fact,
right.
that it's actually helpful because then I can admit it to my client and they're like, oh, that's a whole different thing,
But
right?
that's also such an interesting thing about like keeping feelings hidden, keeping feelings that are like shunned by society or that you think that you're not supposed to have. And that one person, I mean, look at this. We've seen this so many times in our culture where this one person kind of comes out and says, it's okay. Like, I'm going to expose myself, all so that other people, right? And movements start, right? So that all
Yeah,
other people can know and have a sense that you are not the only one. It's
yeah,
amazing how many feelings or circumstances or lived experiences there are that are so common, are so pervasive in our culture, and yet is it really fathomable? It is. I mean, because it's happening that one person can believe it's just me,
yeah,
right? It's
yeah,
it's quite a phenomenon.
yeah,
Anyway,
yeah.
like, get
And
to
then
your
it
last
it
point.
it just isolates us, right?
Yes.
And continue to believe those old narratives. So the last one is C for calling.
Hmm.
So there are parts of us. In the movie Inside Out, I don't know if you remember, there's like this place that's the unconscious, which is this deep crevasse, which actually they make it look really scary, and things get pushed into the unconscious, and fall off the edge, never to be thought of again. But I think we all have wonderful parts of ourself that shame cast out. How many people do you know who are like, "Oh, I'm not an artist." There's so much shame around creativity, and creativity requires risk and vulnerability.
Hmm.
So, so many of us have parts of ourselves and things that we would enjoy, things that, who are really truly core parts of who we are, that until we begin to look at the things critically about the things on the back of the mask, often we hide our dreams. I always wanted to be a what? I've always wanted to try this. And when we can begin to challenge that shame, we can go, I do want to do that. And so it's calling not just in the professional sense, but in the sense of using our gifts and talents joyfully and having this sense of this abundant, life about that. And, it's something that would bring us alive. Like, I love finding beauty. So, I remember during the pandemic, I would just go out and take pictures of beautiful things, and it made me happy. So it's finding those things that bring us joy and doing them, even though it may not come easily at first. And to listen to, I think of again of a Mary Oliver poem, The Summer's Day. What will you do with your one wild and precious life?
Hmm.
Like, that's a calling
Hmm.
question.
Hmm.
And to live, we talk about live your best life, is
Hmm.
sort of a cliche, but that's really what that is.
Hmm.
What are the things that maybe you've never explored, that because you got shamed by a third grade teacher way back when? Oh, you can't sing. Well, maybe you can, you know? Yeah.
Hmm.
So that sense of calling, it kind of helps us listen to that voice of true self that is
Right.
always there within us.
Right. Well, I will simplify the message which I hear, which is you don't have to be burdened by shame,
Yeah.
forever or for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Therapy can help you. I'm sure
Yeah.
there's other ways that can help offset some feelings of shame, even if it is finding the beauty in life and redirecting some of that energy that goes into self-denigration. But Connie, you have a wealth of knowledge, generally speaking, and certainly on this topic. And to try and conquer this in 45 or 50 minutes, shame is extremely complicated.
Yeah.
Um, there's so many aspects of it, subtle and not so subtle.
Yes.
And I hope that whoever's listening certainly takes away that it's a very common feeling. There's
Mhm.
nothing you did wrong to experience the shame or to feel shamed about. We
Yes.
have to learn how to shift our thinking around this. And
Yes.
I thank you for being here, for shedding light
Yes.
on this. And Connie, Connie can be reached at Connie at TLC. Oh, well, actually, no, excuse me, Connie at tlconnections.org.
Yeah.
And she's going to be welcome back. So
Oh, yay.
keep on, keep
Well,
on the
you do a
lookout.
good job. I'm you synthesizing and simplifying and bringing that back together. So I really appreciate the conversation. I really do,
Yes,
Amy. Thank
thank
you so
you.
much.
Well, we have much more to talk about.
All right. I'll look
Thank you
forward
so
to it.
much. All right. Thanks for listening. If this episode resonated with you, please leave a rating, review, or share it with someone who might need it. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next conversation. If there's a topic or question you'd like covered on the show, email me at drmyerspod@gmail.com.
I've got some problems, yeah, I've got some questions. I need some help, point me in any direction. Clinical guidance is what I need to help me become who I'm meant to be. I've been searching for a teacher, another point of view. And I've been asking myself, what would Dr. Meyers do?